What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to our Bible study. Alrighty. So now we're looking at Deuteronomy chapter 4. It seems like the recap portion is done. Moses is done giving context for what he's about to say, and now he's going to give additional encouragement or instruction, or probably a mix of all that kind of stuff. But yeah, and of course, this is all coming before they cross the Jordan River and go into the land of Canaan, which they were promised way back when God made the initial covenant with Abraham. So, anyway, yeah, not too much else I think I need to say in terms of context. So here we go. Deuteronomy chapter 4. And now, Israel, listen carefully to these decrees and regulations that I am about to teach you. Obey them so that you may live, so you may enter and occupy the land that the Lord, the God of your ancestors, is giving you. Do not add to or subtract from these commands I am giving you. Just obey the commands of the Lord your God that I am giving you. You saw for yourself what the Lord did to you at Baal Peor. There the Lord your God destroyed everyone who had worshipped Baal, the god of Peor. But all of you who were faithful to the Lord your God are still alive today, every one of you. Okay, so there was, especially like the second part of verse 1 there, I found particularly interesting just reading through it now. The way it's worded basically makes it sound kind of like Moses is saying, all right, if you obey these instructions, then you'll get to, live in the promised land. With the, unsaid portion of that being that if they don't follow these instructions, then they won't really get to live in the promised land, at least not peacefully. Which, surprise, surprise, later turns out to be quite true when they disobey. But, and I guess just for Moses giving the Israelites an example of this actually happening, he's like, okay, so remember at this place when some of the people worshipped Baal instead of, Yahweh, our God, and then they all were destroyed, but the people who stayed true to the Lord our God lived. Yeah, that proving my point there. Follow God's commands, and it'll go well. If you don't, bad things are going to happen. Okay. So then verse 5. Look, I now teach you these decrees and regulations, just as the Lord my God commanded me, so that you may obey them in the land you are about to enter and occupy. Obey them completely, and you will display your wisdom and intelligence among the surrounding nations. When they hear all these decrees, they will exclaim, "How wise and prudent are the people of this great nation! For what great nation has a God as near to them as the Lord our God is near to us whenever we call on him? And what great nation has decrees and regulations as righteous and fair as this body of instructions that I am giving you today?" So, Moses is basically saying here that, not only is God going to, make things go well with you if you obey him, but he will also, basically the surrounding nations are going to notice that things are going well, and they're going to, look at you in, amazement and with respect and realize that, you know, you're a good people following a good God. So yeah, anyway. Not only would there be kind of recognition from God, but also from the other people groups around them. And I think also in a way, like, some of the kind of some of what Moses is talking about here with the other nations recognizing, you know, these people and their connection with God and how that's beneficial, that probably also kind of goes back to, or leans into at least, the previous idea in the covenant with Abraham that his descendants would be a blessing to the nations, because the other nations would see all of that going on and recognize that it's a good thing and possibly want to emulate that, or at least learn from it, or whatever. But, you know, kind of benefit from seeing that in some way or another. Anyway, okay. Chapter is long. I should continue reading before I get too long-winded. So, anyway, verse 9. But watch out. Be careful never to forget what you yourself have seen. Do not let these memories escape from your mind as long as you live, and be sure to pass them on to your children and grandchildren. Never forget the day when you stood before the Lord your God at Mount Sinai, where he told me, "Summon the people before me, and I will personally instruct them. Then they will learn to fear me as long as they live, and they will teach their children to fear me also." Yeah, so once again, kind of the flip side of, all right, following God will be a good thing. Even other nations will recognize that it's a good thing. But if you don't, like, just, no, do not forget it. Don't let it slip your mind. Make sure that your descendants also know these things, so it'll go well with them. And even if, you know, I was just, as I read the part where it said, "Then they will learn to fear me as long as they live," I mean, I suppose in a way that could legitimately have been fear. A lot of people tend to assume that's more of like a reverence sort of idea, but I mean, especially when the Israelites first saw just the cloud that God was in on Mount Sinai, they were fearful. Probably because it looked a lot like a storm of some sort. Footnote there about Mount Sinai. Hebrew says Horeb, which is just another name for it. But same mountain, same idea. Okay. And continuing with the reflection back on Mount Sinai again, we get to verse 11. "You came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, while flames from the mountain shot into the sky. The mountain was shrouded in black clouds and deep darkness. And the Lord spoke to you from the heart of the fire. You heard the sound of his words, but didn't see his form. There was only a voice. He proclaimed his covenant, the 10 Commandments, which he commanded you to keep, and which he wrote on 2 stone tablets. It was at that time that the Lord commanded me to teach you his decrees and regulations, so you would obey them in the land you are about to enter and occupy." So, I don't know why I just thought of this now, and I'm not saying this is necessarily the case, but, like, flames shooting into the sky and the black clouds, deep darkness. That sounds like a volcano, actually. I'm not saying that it was actually a volcano, but if it wasn't, then all these flames were just coming from God, and obviously where there's fire, there's smoke and clouds and stuff like that around it, but even just being close to something that would even kind of resemble possibly a volcano or that kind of danger, would strike some fear into people. Footnote there at 10 Commandments. Hebrew just says the 10 words. But like, almost with emphasis on the 10 words. Like, the main 10 words. This is the main stuff you need to know and follow. Which is probably why it's more commonly called the 10 Commandments these days. Okay. So then, that was, well, seems like we're still kind of reflecting back on Mount Sinai, but Moses might be, connecting his current / upcoming instructions to what was given to them at Mount Sinai when they were initially, given God's commandments to follow. So, verse 15. But be very careful. You did not see the Lord's form on that day he spoke to you from the heart of the fire at Mount Sinai. So do not corrupt yourselves by making an idol in any form, whether of a man or a woman, an animal on the ground, a bird in the sky, a small animal that scurries along the ground, or a fish in the deepest sea. And when you look up into the sky and see the sun, moon, and stars, all the forces of heaven, don't be seduced into worshipping them. The Lord your God gave them to all the peoples of the earth. Remember that the Lord rescued you from the iron-smelting furnace of Egypt in order to make you his very own people and his special possession, which is what you are today. So, we're not meant to see God's form, which is all the more reason not to be making any idols. Even if the idea is to make something that looks like God, don't try and craft something that might kind of resemble God, but not actually be a full reflection of God, and then worship that imitation of God rather than God himself. Also, don't worship anything that God created, because why should you? Those are things that God created. He is bigger and better than those things. Anywho, moving on, trying to continue kind of quickly, because again, long chapter. So, verse 21. But the Lord was angry with me because of you. He vowed that I would not cross the Jordan River into the good land the Lord your God is giving you as your special possession. You will cross the Jordan to occupy the land, but I will not. Instead, I will die here on the east side of the river. So be careful not to break the covenant the Lord your God has made with you. Do not make idols of any shape or form, for the Lord your God has forbidden this. The Lord your God is a devouring fire. He is a jealous God. In the future, when you have children and grandchildren, and have lived in the land a long time, do not corrupt yourselves by making idols of any kind. This is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, and will arouse his anger. I still find it interesting how Moses is almost kind of slightly passing on the blame for his inability to go to the promised land, as if he himself didn't disobey God. Like, yes, it was him who disobeyed God in that instance, but like, he was frustrated with the people, which was why he did what he did then. And that's probably kind of why he thinks of it like this. Just, yeah, I don't know. But also saying down here that the Lord your God is a devouring fire. Again, going back to the, like, fiery, almost volcano imagery that, like, yeah, maybe don't mess with God, because if you do, you're going to get burned. Whether literally or figuratively. Moving along. Verse 26. Today I call on heaven and earth as witnesses against you. If you break my covenant, you will quickly disappear from the land you are crossing the Jordan to occupy. You will live there only a short time, then you will be utterly destroyed. For the Lord will scatter you among the nations, where only a few of you will survive. There, in a foreign land, you will worship idols made from wood and stone, gods that neither see nor hear, nor eat nor smell. But from there you will search again for the Lord your God. And if you search for him with all your heart and soul, you will find him. In the distant future, when you are suffering all these things, you will finally return to the Lord your God and listen to what he tells you. For the Lord your God is a merciful God. He will not abandon you or destroy you or forget the solemn covenant he made with your ancestors. Once again, this word becomes rather prophetic, because the people do eventually disobey God and stop worshiping him and are scattered to other lands. So, yeah. That might also be a reason why there's the emphasis on idol worship and, trying to avoid that. Because that's, again, God not only being all-powerful, but, knowing of people and how we behave and just really even kind of the inevitable future. It's like, okay, this will trip you up. Be warned. This is this is definitely multiple times now that the Israelites on the whole have heard such warnings and instructions. Now, granted, some of those warnings were to the old generation that is now dead, as at this point in the Bible. But still, in a way, it's maybe not so subtly saying, hey, this will eventually be the downfall of your descendants. So, just saying, just so that doesn't happen to you, maybe try and put that off as long as you can by following these instructions and not making other idols. Not to mention that was also within the Ten Commandments and that kind of stuff. But anyway. Okay, verse 32. Now search all of history, from the time God created people on the earth until now, and search from one end of the heavens to the other. Has anything as great as this ever been seen or heard before? Has any nation ever heard the voice of God speaking from fire as you did and survived? Has any other God dared to take a nation for himself out of another nation by means of trials, miraculous signs, wonders, war, a strong hand, a powerful arm, and terrifying acts? Yet that is what the Lord your God did for you in Egypt, right before your eyes. Footnote there at God. Hebrew might have said voice of a God instead. Interesting. I guess because it's talking about other nations, they might not necessarily have heard from, God as in, Yahweh. They more likely would have heard from another, deity that they worship. And yeah. So it's like Moses is now like, all right, so has anything like this happened before where, a deity has taken a people group and just straight up rescued them from the clutches of another people group? No, this isn't a thing that happens all the time. Moving on to verse 35. He showed you these things so you would know that the Lord is God and there is no other. He let you hear his voice from heaven so he could instruct you. He let you see his great fire here on earth so he could speak to you from it. Because he loved your ancestors, he chose to bless their descendants, and he personally brought you out of Egypt with a great display of power. He drove out the nations far greater than you, so he could bring you in and give you their land as your special possession, as it is today. So remember this and keep it firmly in mind. The Lord is God both in heaven and on earth, and there is no other. If you obey all the decrees and commands I am giving you today, all will be well with you and your children. I am giving you these instructions so you will enjoy a long life in the land the Lord your God is giving you for all time. So, all that to say, like, these amazing things that, like, don't happen, this was God, your God, that has done these things. He's the only one worth worshiping. So, remember these commands so that things will go well, kind of re-emphasizing that. On to verse 41. Then Moses set apart 3 cities of refuge east of the Jordan River. Anyone who killed another person unintentionally without previous hostility could flee there to live in safety. These were the cities: Bezer on the wilderness plateau for the tribe of Reuben, Ramoth in Gilead for the tribe of Gad, Golan in Bashan for the tribe of Manasseh. These cities of refuge were described back kind of close to the end of Numbers, as I recall. And they were pretty much for the purpose that was just described there. Why it needs to mention those now, of all times, I don't know. But, I mean, if that was just the next thing that actually happened in the sequence of events or whatever, then, okay, sure. Just keeping a timeline of events. Okay, not much else to say there. Verse 44. This is the body of instruction that Moses presented to the Israelites. These are the laws, decrees, and regulations that Moses gave to the people of Israel when they left Egypt, and as they camped in the valley near Beth Peor, east of the Jordan River. This land was formerly occupied by the Amorites under King Sihon, who ruled from Heshbon, but Moses and the Israelites destroyed him and his people when they came up from Egypt. Israel took possession of his land and that of King Og of Bashan, the 2 Amorite kings east of the Jordan. So Israel conquered the entire area from Aroer at the edge of the Arnon Gorge all the way to Mount Sirion, also called Mount Hermon, and they conquered the eastern bank of the Jordan River as far south as the Dead Sea, below the slopes of Pisgah. Okay, so this seems like this section is a bit of a preamble to the actual, like, new instructions that Moses is giving the people. Maybe not even necessarily new, but the instructions that Moses is about to give the people at this point in time, and the way it's described, there might also be a lot of overlap with the commands that really God gave the people through Moses at Mount Sinai. And I guess we'll get into that in the next chapter. But that's... I assume that the next part then will be the commands that Moses was talking about earlier on when he was saying, hey, make sure you follow these commands so things go well in the Promised Land. Footnotes there. Mount Sirion. That is as in the Syriac version. Hebrew reads Mount Sion. Okay, just different name for it. Dead Sea there. And talking about calling it the Sea of the Arabah instead of calling it like the Dead Sea by the Jordan River. But anyway, just different names for things. I seem to recall somewhat recently looking up the word Arabah or whatever, and it pretty much just meant like wilderness or desert. So it's not necessarily like that was actually a particularly special name that had another significant meaning to it. Kind of hearkening back to earlier on in the Bible, a lot of names given were rather literal in their meanings. But anyway, so I guess that does it for Deuteronomy chapter 4. I don't have any other thoughts on it. So, yeah. Come back next time when we cover chapter 5 and following, apparently getting into Moses' second address and other commands that might end up sounding kind of familiar, or maybe a little bit not so much. I don't know. Anyway, rambling on now. That's it for this chapter. Okay, so, basically, the first kind of new-ish instruction that Moses gives in Deuteronomy is pretty much just to make sure that they follow God and His commands and His will, and don't worship any other gods or anything like that. Pretty much, basic, like, Ten Commandments level stuff. But, they're considered important for a reason. Kind of a big deal to God. But anyway. So, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel. Click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description to get info on other social media pages and other ways to keep up with what I'm doing online and all that good stuff. And leave comments down below there with any thoughts you have. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.